notes that South Africa remains the most unequal country in the world, and that race continues to be a key driver of inequality.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the true story of inequality in South Africa, a country where the gap between the rich and the poor is as wide as it gets. On one side, you have those living in luxury, their homes protected by high walls and electric fences, while on the other side, millions of South Africans, predominantly black, are struggling to make ends meet. Today, we're going deep into the facts, the causes, and the consequences of this inequality, with a special focus on how black South Africans find themselves at the bottom of the economic ladder. This is not just a story about numbers. It's about people, history, and the structural problems that still plague the nation nearly 3 decades after the end of apartheid. Get ready, because this is a story that must be told, a story that goes beyond South Africa and resonates globally. If you're wondering why South Africa is still facing these problems, stick around. We've got data, analysis, and solutions. Let's start with the cold, hard data, because numbers don't lie. According to the World Bank, South Africa is officially the most unequal country in the world, with a Gini coefficient of 0.63. For those unfamiliar with the term, a Gini coefficient of 0 represents perfect equality, while 1 represents maximum inequality. South Africa's 0.63 shows just how deeply unequal this nation is. But it's not just about the Gini coefficient. According to a 2022 Inequality Trends report, 10% of the population controls more than 90% of the wealth, while the bottom 50% owns less than 2%. At the very bottom of this economic hierarchy are black South Africans. In 2022, 55% of black South Africans lived below the upper poverty line, compared to 1% of white South Africans. Let that sink in. After 30 years of democracy, over half of the black population in South Africa is still trapped in poverty. So, why is this happening? To understand that, we need to look at the historical and systemic factors that created and continue to perpetuate inequality. We cannot talk about inequality in South Africa without talking about apartheid. Under this brutal system, which lasted from 1948 to 1994, the government systematically oppressed the black majority, stripping them of their land, their rights, and their economic opportunities. During apartheid, black South Africans were forcibly removed from their homes and relocated to impoverished townships and rural homelands. The vast majority were denied access to quality education, formal employment, and land ownership. White South Africans, meanwhile, enjoyed the benefits of a booming economy, world-class education, and exclusive property ownership in prime locations. When apartheid ended in 1994, South Africa was filled with hope for a brighter future. Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, ANC, ushered in democracy, but the economic system was still rigged in favor of the privileged few. While political apartheid ended, economic apartheid continued. The new government faced the monumental task of undoing centuries of structural inequality, but progress has been painfully slow. Why? One of the key promises of post-apartheid South Africa was economic empowerment for the black majority. The government introduced policies like Black Economic Empowerment, BEE, and land reform, hoping to redistribute wealth and create a more equitable society. However, these policies have largely failed to make a meaningful difference for the majority of black South Africans. Let's start with BE. On paper, BE was supposed to create opportunities for black South Africans by encouraging businesses to hire more black employees and promoting black ownership of companies. While BEE has helped a small elite become wealthy, it hasn't done much for the masses. In fact, BEE has been criticized for creating a black elite who have benefited from government contracts and corporate board seats, while the majority of black South Africans remain excluded from the formal economy. Then there's land reform. The government aimed to redistribute land to Black South Africans, but the process has been slow and ineffective. Today, more than 72% of farmland is still owned by white South Africans, who make up less than 8% of the population. Meanwhile, millions of Black South Africans live in overcrowded townships, with little to no land ownership or access to the economic opportunities that land provides. And what about unemployment? Unemployment in South Africa is at a crisis level, with an official rate of 32.6% as of 2023. Among young people, it's even worse. Youth unemployment stands at nearly 60%. And again, Black South Africans bear the brunt of this crisis. The unemployment rate among Black South Africans is 36%, compared to 7% among white South Africans. So you can see why these broken promises have left millions of Black South Africans trapped in a cycle of poverty. But it's not just the failed policies that are to blame. The structure of South Africa's economy itself is a key driver of inequality. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer, right? Well, not in South Africa. Instead, the country's education system perpetuates inequality. Wealthy South Africans, predominantly white, can afford to send their children to private schools that offer world-class education. Meanwhile, most Black children attend underfunded public schools, where classrooms are overcrowded, teachers are underqualified, and resources are scarce. According to a 2021 report, 78% of grade 4 students in South Africa cannot read for meaning. The majority of these students are from poor, predominantly Black communities. This education gap creates a massive barrier to social mobility, making it nearly impossible for Black South Africans to break out of poverty and compete in a modern, skills-driven economy. Then there's the labor market. Even if you're lucky enough to get an education, finding a job is another story. The South African labor market is highly segmented, with formal jobs, those with contracts, benefits, and job security dominated by the privileged minority. Most Black South Africans work in the informal sector, where jobs are precarious, poorly paid, and come with no social protections. Domestic work, street vending, and informal construction jobs are common, but they do little to lift people out of poverty. What's worse, the lack of job opportunities for Black South Africans creates a sense of hopelessness, especially among young people. Without education, without jobs, and without opportunities, many young Black South Africans turn to crime, further deepening the cycle of poverty and inequality. Now let's talk about the social consequences of this inequality. South Africa has one of the highest crime rates in the world, and much of it is driven by poverty and inequality. The country's murder rate stands at 41.5 per 100,000 people, making it one of the most dangerous places on earth. Violent crime, including robberies and assaults, is rampant in poor communities where unemployment is high and opportunities are few. There's a direct link between inequality and crime. When people feel excluded from the economy, when they have no hope of finding a job or improving their situation, they turn to crime out of desperation. This is particularly true in South Africa's urban areas, where the stark contrast between wealth and poverty is most visible. The country's high levels of crime and violence have a devastating impact on its economy. Businesses are reluctant to invest in areas with high crime rates, further reducing job opportunities for the people living there. It's a vicious cycle. Inequality breeds crime, and crime perpetuates inequality. As if the inequality, unemployment, and crime weren't enough, South Africa is also grappling with a crippling electricity crisis. The state-owned power utility, Eskom, has been unable to provide a stable electricity supply for years, leading to rolling blackouts, known as load shedding, that have become a daily occurrence. In 2023 alone, South Africa experienced more than 200 days of power outages. These blackouts don't just leave people in the dark, they cripple the economy. Small businesses are forced to close their doors, large factories have to shut down production lines, and hospitals struggle to keep the lights on. The result? Even fewer job opportunities and an even wider gap between the rich and the poor. The wealthy can afford to buy generators and solar panels to keep their homes and businesses running, but for the majority of Black South Africans, load shedding means lost income and even more economic insecurity. It's yet another way that South Africa's inequality is deeply entrenched. So, is there any hope? South Africa's government recognizes the inequality crisis, and President Cyril Ramaphosa has pledged to address it through economic reforms, infrastructure investment, and improved service delivery. However, progress has been slow. In 2022, the government announced plans to accelerate land reform by expropriating land without compensation, but this has sparked controversy and legal battles. Many believe that land reform is crucial to addressing inequality, but others fear that it could destabilize the economy even further if not done carefully. Meanwhile, the government has also introduced programs aimed at reducing youth unemployment, such as the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, which has created temporary jobs for thousands of young people. But critics argue that these programs are not enough. What South Africa needs is a complete overhaul of its economy, one that provides opportunities for all, not just the privileged few. South Africa's inequality is a story of contrasts. Extreme wealth alongside extreme poverty, political freedom alongside economic oppression, and hope for the future alongside deep frustration. At the heart of this story are Black South Africans, who remain at the bottom of the economic hierarchy nearly 30 years after apartheid ended. The challenges are enormous, but they are not insurmountable. South Africa's government must take bold action to address inequality by reforming the education system, creating sustainable jobs, redistributing land, and investing in infrastructure like electricity. But it's not just up to the government. Businesses, civil society, and ordinary citizens all have a role to play in building a more equitable and prosperous South Africa. Because let's be clear, if South Africa fails to address its inequality crisis, the consequences will be dire, not just for the country, but for the world. South Africa is a bellwether for other nations facing similar challenges. The time for action is now. And there you have it, folks. South Africa's inequality crisis laid bare. If you found this video insightful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep this conversation going because South Africa's story is far from over.